He'll be.
Backyard.
Got it. Or we'll build a tree house or something on YouTube.
We're going? We're live. All right. We'll pray and we'll get started. Tonight's topic is going to be missions and Papuliness. So.
Got it. Or we'll build a tree.
Oh man.
Built a tree.
Who is that guy?
We're going to build a tree house. Wow. That's,
Good part.
I heard you say that, and it took a while to get over there.
Well, I thought I was.
Sound travels slowly from that end of the
I
table to
thought
that
I
end.
muted it, but I actually, I didn't know my computer was already muted this week, that's why I actually unmuted it.
So they're actually pretty. There's quite a delay there.
Yes, there's a big delay. Like your fingers are moving right now. I don't know how long ago you just went like this, and now you're back like this, and now you're here.
Okay, now we're going to the eyebrows.
I'll let you know when they show up.
They show up.
Well, that's kind of-
Right now.
You're free to start, Pops. You're free to start.
All right, well, let's pray, and we'll get started on the topic. Thank you, Father, for the blessings you give to us in so many different ways. Father, certainly your word is important because it tells us about you. And without that, we would have really no message to tell anyone else. So thank you for that, and so that missions actually is something we are concerned about. How do we get the gospel out to other people? Give us some insights tonight as we discuss this topic of making sure that we're thinking through in a biblical manner of how to proceed with what you have commanded. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so housekeeping things. If you're online, make sure you go to the website. It's some form of what's behind me. We don't remember if it was a dash or underlines between, but you'll, if not, just scroll down on the entry page and there's a link there to get to it. The schedule is slightly changed from what was posted. We're not having class next week. My wife and I are going to be out of town, and I'm not sure we'll make it back in time. And there also is one additional class that's been added to the schedule. Is that correct? And these dashes or underlined?
These are additions.
Okay. I should put somewhere in my notes. Also, what else? If you are online, make sure you go to the same thing and pull up the missions policy, because that's kind of what we're going to be talking about tonight. Okay, first thing is missions. The word mission or missions does not occur in the scriptures. We use the English term to describe quite a few things to get it, but basically it's going to come down either a mission is the goal that is desired of an individual organization. My mission is to do whatever, and so it's used in more than just churches. But there should be some kind of goal that every organization has as well. And the second is missions is often in the Christian world is referring to the effort to spread the faith of Christianity to other places. So that's what we mean by using the word mission. So it'd be a lot nicer if we just go to Scripture and here's a whole section where Paul said, here's what missions is, but instead we have to go to Acts and kind of see what he's doing, and we have to go to all the commands of what we're supposed to do, and that our goals are to satisfy God, to obey Him, to carry out His plan of evangelizing the world, which includes a lot of other things that go with it. So, hence mission. So, let's get some definitions down. First, usually in mission circles they talk about 1, 2, and 3, or 3 levels of missions. There's local missions, there's cross-cultural missions, and there's long-distance missions, sometimes called overseas, but you don't have to go overseas to do long distances. So let's define some of those. First, what would local missions be? What do you think?
In your home community?
Yeah, it's your home community, so that would include evangelism, right? And depending on your community, that could also include some cross-cultural stuff too. So local just means you're close at home. What is your local church doing? And then outreach into your community, how are you going to do that? Sometimes there's cooperative efforts. Sometimes there's parachurch organizations that may be part of that local outreach. Think like you have a college campus nearby, there may be parachurch organizations are part of that. Will you be part of that, supporting them? Or are you doing something on that campus yourself? How are you reaching the different groups within your community? So that would be local missions. So you can see right from there, it can expand pretty quickly just in stuff that's done locally. Different churches in one community might be making effort to a different aspect of that community too. I was just reading some stuff on Teen Challenge that started as a local mission to reach heroin addicts in the 60s and then expanded internationally now with all sorts of people in drug cultures. And then there's a lot of other things that have taken that same thing. That just started off as a local mission. How are we going to reach these particular people in our community? So that's local. How about cross-cultural?
American Spanish.
Okay, it could be language barrier. That'd be a different culture, because culture follows language. Anything else might be a different culture? They might all speak English. Would they necessarily be the same culture? not necessarily. Here we have more of a melting pot. Think in terms of if you're overseas, you can have two that speak pretty much close to the same language, but they're actually two different tribes, two different cultures. So how do you get past those barriers to reach those people? That entails more thoughtfulness in trying to do it. One is you may have to learn a language, or you may have to learn to figure out what their culture is like and how they do things, and try and avoid cultural landmines, which we all have stepped to because we're Americans and we have many mixed cultures and you never know quite what you're walking into. I mean, a practical one, in some cultures it's rude just to show up at somebody's house. You're supposed to call first. You're supposed to make some kind of announcement, or even to the formal, someone's supposed to come and introduce you. And then there's other cultures exactly opposite. If you call first, that's considered rude. What do you mean you're not just dropping by? What's this all about? We're informal here. Some friends of ours that went to Holland learned that if you're served a plate of cookies in America, what would you do?
Eat them
Eat
all.
them.
Eat them till they're all gone. You don't do that there.
And the ice cream.
How many cookies are there,
Ask for some
you get
ice cream.
one.
And in the cabinet, the beans.
So it's learning those
That's
things.
why they're so slim.
So that's cross-cultural. And I'm sure the two of you, since you've been in Africa, and since you've been in several places in Africa, you ran into a lot of those things, like, I'm not sure what they're doing. And that's not even talking about the food. Can you survive it? Maybe. Do you want to survive it? Sometimes maybe not. But they may think the same things are. So that's called, what about long distance?
Far away from home.
Far away. Could it be long distance to the same culture?
Sure.
Could be, because you could have expatriates someplace, or those that have colonized someplace that are your culture. So you may already know the language, so that's pretty good, but more often than not it's cross-cultural and long distance, and that has its own challenges, which you've experienced a lot. Especially being in Burundi, it's hard to get communication too. But you and Jeff figured out how to do it, so I'm impressed.
Made it work.
She fell in love with me first.
Had reason to overcome the distance and all the rest of it. Okay, so feel free to, if you want to add any insights from any of that as we're going through the topic, that'd be great. I'm going to kind of go through the church missions policy, but I'm going to do it from the standpoint of when we first put it together. There was a organization called, what was it called back then?
I don't know.
I'm trying to think of it. American,
Carter's asking right now.
I think Association of
Probably.
American Missions Committees. So it was an organization formed to try to help churches think through missions in their local church. And one of the books they put out to help with that was just a book of questions. Excellent questions of here's all the things you've got to think about in putting together a policy. So instead of writing a policy for churches, and here's a good example, it's you have to think through these questions. You have to think through what is it going to be in your church, and it's going to be varying from church to church. Some things shouldn't change because there's some basic parameters that we're going to find in scriptures, but there's a lot of other things you're going to think through. What can you do? For example, a very large church has some more options than a small church doesn't. A small church cannot fully fund one person. They may not be able to fully fund their own pastor. How are they going to fully fund another missionary? So there will be differences and nuances. You've got to think through all that stuff. So the first question I have, why is it important for a church to even have a clear definition of missions? Some of this will be pragmatic, some of this will be more biblical. We'll get to that when we get to purposes in a minute. Okay, what happens if a church has no policy?
Fund anything.
We got no missions.
It's whatever the committee's preferences are, their favorites.
There's no framework.
There's no framework, a question comes up, and you have to debate it every time, no matter what the question is. How do you know the person even qualifies as a missionary? You have no policy, you have no idea even what you're looking for. Even here, I know there was no policy when I got here, and the church was running around 60 or 70 on a really good Sunday, and there were 25 missionaries. Okay, the church had shrunk, and I understand at one time it was like 120 or 30 or something like that. So, but it shrunk. You got 25 missionaries, you got 60 people, including the kids, trying to keep up with these missionaries. How do you do that? So then it was like, well, how did these various missionaries get on there? Well, there was some money available, so, hey, I liked how that guy spoke. This is my friend. Well, those may be nice, but does that necessarily mean they're qualified to go out in the mission field? The two of you who've been on the mission field, is every missionary you met out there really qualified to be there?
Yes.
I mean, should we comment on the fact that we're both here now, or?
No.
Definitely not, most definitely not.
No, so how do you start thinking through all those things? So that's the whole point of even having a policy. Without one, you're going to run into all sorts of nasty troubles. You're going to end up causing division and fighting and bickering and all sorts of things. I like this mission. We don't have enough money for all the missionaries, but I like this missionary, and back and forth you go. In addition, if there's no policy, no one has thought through strategically of how your church should be involved in missions. What kind of mission should you be involved in? Is there a representation of that you're trying to target particular groups? Are you going to be like most churches that have, well, I've seen both extremes. Some churches have almost nothing for foreign missions, for long distance, cross-cultural, because everything's focused locally. And there's the others that are completely the opposite. They don't count it missions if it's somewhere within 50 miles of you. That's not real missions. How are you going to deal with all that stuff? So it's important to have a policy, which means you have to think through it, or you are going to end up with problems. We had an issue here. If we didn't have a policy, we probably would have had a real big problem. We had a problem anyways, but because we had a policy, we could go back to it. What is our definitions? Do they fit? If they don't fit, then they're not really qualified. So that's the importance. Next question, and actually this one is dealing with the definition of missions and the policy. What would fit within biblical parameters in spreading the Christian faith? Under the general definition of mission in the Christian context is spreading the Christian faith. What kinds of things wouldn't be included in that? Now, obviously, evangelism would be part of that. Sharing the gospel. What else would be included in that?
Planting a church.
Making disciples.
Okay, making disciples, because the command of Jesus, well, we're to proclaim the gospel, period. That's in so many different scriptures. To go and proclaim the gospel. We're to make disciples by going, baptizing, and teaching. So, planting churches is going to be part of that, making disciples. What do we mean by planting churches? What does that entail?
Training local people.
Okay, so we have to get a definition. What do you mean by a church? So a local body of believers, that means it's going to end up with some kind of structure. There's going to be someone or people in it who are able to teach, and you're going to start trying to see within a local fellowship of disciples that the gifts are starting to be used among each other. Those with gifts in teaching and leadership and administration and service and helps and all the rest. You start seeing them function together as a local body, a local manifestation of Christ's body. So you want to establish churches. That's going to be the fruit of disciple making. So planting churches, making disciples. In the Great Commission, there was the going, there's baptizing, and then there's teaching. So teaching is going to be part of it. Teaching Christian doctrines, informing people what God has said about different things. So that's going to be part of it. What else?
you said making disciples, teaching biblical doctrine, church planning, leadership development, church development, and translation and dissemination of the scriptures.
Okay, that's what we've listed out in ours. Now, part of that, we've listed those out because we don't want things excluded. People think it's not part of overall missions. Certainly church leadership development is part of that. So we would want to encourage people to go cross-culturally, distance areas, and even within their own local community of teaching people to be leaders in their church. So it replicates itself. I've got a friend, Dan Packer, who's, he's heading back to Africa in a couple weeks, but the mission he's part of, IDEM, is targeting leaders within the African church and training them in how to train other pastors. So it's very focused, sort of like we have a lot of GMI missionaries that we know our friends with. Let's train the leaders so they can train the others. So it's strategic, but it's certainly definitely part of missions, spreading the Christian faith by equipping people to do exactly that in their own culture. So that's very effective. Church development. You get a church going, but how many churches are healthy? Do they even know what it means to be healthy? So certainly going in and coming alongside to assist churches in their development is be part of missions. And then groups that translate scriptures, that's certainly going to be part of it, because how do we spread the Christian faith if they don't know what the scriptures say? So we want to translate it into some means by which they can understand it. Okay? So that is how we have defined it. What about those groups that have the missions defined, but it's primarily dealing with social service or good works? Can that fit as missions?
As the priority?
And if so, how?
If it's not a priority, I mean, the gospel should be the priority. I mean, you have a lot of people running out building wells, but they're not sharing the gospel.
So is going out and digging wells a mission in of itself?
No.
Not unless it's part of something else,
Yes.
right?
If it's a
So-
means to an end.
It has to be means then. For example, some of the groups that you were with, they did the well digging, and you were involved in one or two projects, right? But how did that fit within the mission?
It was, it was social development. That was a big part of it, but it was an accompaniment with, it's like, we're here, this is who we are, come to our, every night was an evangelistic meeting, basically.
So it was a means to an end.
It was a means to an end, but I wouldn't take away from the, I don't know, how would I put it? So like, in the sense of, I wrote down the word benevolence.
Okay.
So in the sense of benevolence, it seems biblically that other Christians are to be put on priority.
Okay.
That's what I get.
Galatians
That's what I get
6.
from. Well, also with the Jews in Jerusalem and everything like that.
Okay.
So-
Galatians 6, let's do it all of men, but especially those who are of the household of faith.
But that seems to be
6:10.
part of hospitality, not specifically missions. So like what you're saying, if it's missions, then it's in accompaniment with some sort of a evangelistic effort.
Okay.
If to be called
You've been
missions.
going down the DR for several years, and one of them is the Compassion Center that they're involved with. Is that a mission? And if so, how so?
It's a mission because they're teaching kids the Bible every day.
Yeah. So theirs is a compassionate outreach into a very poor community to teach very practical things, such as being able to read and write and practical skills, how to help themselves. But all through it is, here's the gospel, this is what Christianity is. You were involved with a Christian hospital, okay? Or the parameters for a Christian medical outreach to actually be a mission as opposed to just social service.
Well, there was most of my teammates were in the medical field, but then there was also, everybody had their spheres of influence and was doing discipleship,
Okay.
Bible studies with the hospital leadership, with the local doctors.
So social services can be part of a mission, But you have to be very careful when we're thinking about what the Scripture actually says a mission is in terms of obeying God to disseminate the faith of Christianity, of making a block between the two or separating them where evangelism and fulfilling what God has called us to do actually isn't there. I'll give you an example of that. Marvin Miloski wrote a book, I guess it was in the 80s, The Tragedy of Marriage Compassion, and it was his research project was going into shelters and food banks and feed the homeless kind of places, looking real shabby, wearing clothes, and just seeing how different churches involved in this were acting. And one of the things that he found extremely tragic is that in most of the churches he went into, he would ask for a Bible. He couldn't get one. He could get seconds on the food, he could not get a Bible. So it had gone into the social gospel. We are doing God's work by being kind to each other, being charitable, and those are nice things to do, but that's not missions. That's a big difference. The UN can go in and do that kind of stuff. That may be their mission, but it's not a Christian mission. Okay, that's the big difference. And that's one of the things that you have to think through. Otherwise, compassion can really suck you into, well, we got to do this nice thing. It's a nice thing to do, but is it a mission as defined by what Scripture requires of it? So you have to start your policy, whatever you're going to do, or when you're thinking about missions, with that in mind. Because if you don't, it is going to degenerate. It will degenerate into those things that people are uncomfortable. How many people are really comfortable sharing the gospel, especially if it's cross-cultural? I have a hard enough time asking to get something to eat. How am I going to share the gospel with somebody? Okay, so how about sharing the gospel with someone who does speak your language? A lot of people are intimidated by that. So it's easy to think I'm involved in doing God's work by doing what I like to do, I'm comfortable doing, rather than actually what God has said to do. So we start at that point. If we're going to think about missions, we must think of what has God asked to do. What is, or put it this way, a mission always has a goal. What are the goals God has given us to accomplish? And so we let missions be defined by the goals God has given us to fulfill His desires rather than what makes us feel good because we've done something. Okay, so that's our starting point for all missions. Whatever it is, whatever level it is, okay? Whether it's reaching teens, out on the street, playing basketball, or wherever you end up trying to drag them in from, or medical missions, or anything else. We have a goal. And our goal is to please God, to do what He says, to fulfill His desires. So that's the starting place. All right, why would it be important for a church to have a clear missions and missionary policy? Similar to the idea of having a clear definition of missions.
Answers already thought through questions?
Yeah, because it's going to be the same thing we were discussing earlier. Without a clear policy dealing with missions, what missions are, what you decide is going to be for your church, and what a missions organization, what you require from them, you're going to end up right back in that same problem. Well, what exactly is the mission? Does it fit? Is it a mission, or is it something else? We have to have that. So the clearer your policy is, the better able you are to be wise and discerning in making sure you're being efficient and effective with what God has entrusted to you to enable God's goals to be fulfilled. So a good policy is very important. Just like it is in most areas of life, if you can put together a good policy, it means you've already thought through the issues. So now you're thinking through things rather than reacting emotionally. And as humans, our tendency is to react emotionally, one way or the other. I reject it, or I completely accept it because how I feel about it, rather than thinking through how does this actually fit with what should be done, how it should be done. Okay? Any comments, questions about any of that? Okay, what topics do you think would be important to cover in a missions policy? Probably quite a few things, right?
What type of mission?
Okay, definition of your mission. So you can kind of scan our major headings, you'll see a lot of that. We got to define what it is. Do that. We also put in not only defining missions, but what our specific purpose is, why we have a policy, what we also think the overall responsibilities will be for missionaries, and what we're going to cover. So there's a lot of stuff. What it is, how about, you have to have something about who's qualified and by what criteria will they be qualified. You're going to have to do something about finances in all aspects. How to raise money, what to do money that's given to you, how to deal, what level of support does a person actually need? How do you set that? What do you do if a missionary is in trouble financially? What do you do if there's overabundance of money? How do you handle all those questions? What happens when the missionary is on furlough and technically, quote unquote, not out on the field doing their work? I'm glad for the organizations that are calling it home field ministries, because it can be more tiring being on quote unquote furlough than it is being back out on the field. What about a missionary who retires? What kind of plans have been done for that? So there's a lot of stuff right there. What about the relationship of the missions organization and the missionary and the church? What kind of relationship should there be? You're going to have to think through a lot of those issues.
You know, communication and whatnot, right?
What are you going to require for communication? What are you going to require of them doctrinally? Or is it going to be loose? Is it going to be sloppy? Or is it going to be very tight? How will you set a priority of who you would consider to be a missionary? Those are all important questions of just getting through that. Another whole area, how do you inspire young people to want to go into missions? Because if the church isn't doing it, who is? It's got to come from the church. Or if the church isn't doing it, what about within your own family? You know, do you talk about missions? Do you have missionaries over? Do you pray for missionaries? Is that part of your family structures, that you raise your kids with this idea that missions is part of life, both locally and even would I be willing to leave? How are you going to accomplish all that? That's going to be part of what you're going to cover too. Okay, we'll probably hit some more of these topics as we go through this. Is it necessary for a church to have a missions committee? Why or why not? And what would be the advantage or disadvantage of having a missions committee? Do you have to have a missions committee? No, you don't have to have one. There's no biblical mandate for a missions committee. Did the church at Antioch have a missions committee?
Excuse me?
Did the church at Antioch have a missions committee?
They did commission.
They commissioned, but it
Wasn't a formal.
It says at Antioch, it says while they were ministering to the Lord and fasting, the Holy Spirit said. So actually it looked like it's the whole church, or at least the leaders in the church, set aside for me Barnabas and Saul, for I have work for them to call. When they fasted and prayed, they laid hands on them and they sent them their way. So it's like the leaders were the ones that did that, but it looked like the whole church was involved with it in some degree. So do you have to have a committee?
Mm-hmm.
No. What's the advantage of a committee?
It's a little easier and clearer on making decisions.
Okay. Do you have more people to be involved?
Yeah, it's
So
like
it's not
any,
one person who lacks.
yeah, it's like anything else. You just, there's wisdom in counseling with multiple people, and you could get somebody who just wants to always push their favorite missionary or whatnot. So that kind of
I think they can focus. If it's just like, I think the elders become the de facto committee.
yeah.
And
They
they're
do.
they could be doing 100 things. It'd be nice to have a small group of people, that's what their focus is. They could probably do a better job.
So if there's a committee, then your missions program has a lot of facets, right? Okay, so who's communicating with the missionary?
Should be everybody.
committee.
Well, a committee, if you have one, should at least be doing it right, and you have different people sign to make sure that even the letters are disseminated, and should be encouraging people to do something about communicating with missionaries. Who's the one that communicates the most with missionaries?
By the pastor.
Usually
Or
Not
whoever.
necessarily.
the person most interested in them, what they're doing.
Church treasurer, because they're.
Treasurer,
The
yeah.
treasurer?
Write a check.
Oh, because they send them a check.
They send the
Oh,
check,
that's terrible.
and they're the one who actually looks into the envelope and reads the letters that come in. That's the reality of most churches. The treasurer knows more about the missionaries than anybody else in the church. That's pretty sad. Okay? The pastor may know quite a bit about some of them, but some he may not know very well. That's going to get into another thing about how to make sure you know your missionaries, what's going on. So if you have a committee, they can be focused in on different areas where you have an interest. And of course, the larger the church, the easier it is to have people who are focused on that. If it's a small church, you may not have that many. That also gets down into some pragmatic things, is how many missionaries should church have within a range of size. Obviously, a larger church could have more. They have the finances, they have more people to be involved. If it's a small church, here's an idea that's being thrown out, and still in some churches. We'd like to have a missionary on all the populated continents. So we don't necessarily want to have one in Antarctica, but if they could, that'd be great too. But we got to have a missionary, and you're a church of 30 people.
Start small. Start on one
Leaving a
continent.
lot of islands out.
Okay, and that's a real way that some churches look at it. We got to cover the globe, go into all the world, and our part is to go into all the world. So we got to have at least one missionary in every continent, and that's how they choose their next missionary. We don't have anybody in Asia, so we got to. Next one has got to go to Asia, whether they're qualified or not. And so you could, and then you don't have enough people. Does anybody know what's going on with the missionary? So those are factors that come into it, but behind that is this whole philosophy of what you think missions is and what you should be involved in and why you should be involved in it. You have to think through all those things. So a missions committee can be a real advantage in spreading out the work. Someone should be informing the congregation and make that a task. Someone should be making sure communication from the missionary is disseminated. A little easier now because most missionaries are electronic. You get an email and you hit a button, you can send it out easily to anybody interested, but it could also mean you get a hard copy, you're copying it and giving it to different groups or different individuals interested in that missionary. That takes time, so there's administrative tasks for that. What about checking out a missionary? That takes time to check out how a missionary is doing, what's going on. What about traveling to the field? Yeah, I think that'd be great. I like to travel the world, so I like that assignment. Part of your duties is travel and visit all the missionaries. David wants that assignment. Not Natasha's smiling because she says, I get to go too. Right?
Yeah,
That'd be cool.
it'd be fun.
Well, obviously, it would take more to do that, and it'd be too expensive for a small church, so more of someone's traveling over there, could you stop in and see the missionary? Might get them excited about what's going on. So you can see there's a lot of different facets to all this. But we want to see how can we fulfill what God has called us to do in disseminating Christianity throughout the world. And all the different things that are, what would be a negative about a disadvantage for a missions committee?
Just the concept of a missionary? What would be a negative about the concept of a missionary?
Of the missions committee, what would be the disadvantages?
Too many cooks, spoil the pot.
Probably the same thing with all committees, things take longer to get done.
It can be. So the fewer the people, the faster you can get action done. The more people, the slower that is. So it's a pro and con, and you're going to have to work through that. So some of it means you're going to have to make sure that you're careful who's on the committee, which is the next question. What criteria would be important in setting up a missions committee and selecting members? Do you just want anybody to show up and say, okay, you're a part of the committee and you get to determine these things?
No, but sometimes it's reality.
Sometimes it is the reality, and that's where problems can come in too, right?
Probably don't want that. You want people that are genuinely concerned, because you could get someone that, my cousin is a missionary, and, I want to make sure my church supports him, and his character, we don't even know him, so I want to get my foot in the door to give him a good word, and stuff like that happens.
It happens. We've had siblings
Mhm.
here who definitely wanted their brother or sister supported as they're on the field. Don't know anything about it. Now, that doesn't exclude them, but that's not a good criteria to say is that,
Yeah, it's not a motivation to join, that's not, they're not really interested in missions.
they're interested in
Yeah.
their relative. Are they really in missions, or is it just that? Or somebody they met, okay, now I want people from Bible college or something, and they have all their friends. Got to support them all. That may or may not be good. So you should have some kind of criteria by who's going to be making those decisions, influencing. What if someone, well, let's start with the first criteria. What should be a first criteria of anybody be on the missions committee?
To be a Christian.
It should be a Christian first, right? Otherwise, you may have those as, yeah, but I really want, there's this great group that you're feeding the poor over someplace. And we need to feed the poor. People are starving. But there's no evangelism with it. It's excluded. So, should be a Christian first. Second,
Member.
they should be a member of your church, so that you at least know where they are doctrinally, and they're thinking along the same lines. That would be very helpful. How about they know the missions policy and agree with it,
Right.
and they'll follow it? That doesn't mean the committee can't change some things as they debate and think through it, but they should at least agree to follow what you've already got. That would help keep nepotism from rising or just pushing your friend. And it can get bad. I've known of churches where a new pastor comes in and he gets rid of all the current missionaries to put in his ones he likes, his friends from college. So there can be a lot of bad things that happen. So you want to make sure someone actually is agreed, knows. How about if someone's going to be part of the committee, they would at least agree to read a synopsis and get to know something about all the missionaries you support? Okay, they're certainly going to have their favorites, they're going to want to correspond, but they should know at least something about all of them. Otherwise, that would be, I think, an important criteria. They're going to need to be able to put some time into it. Should a missions committee just be an executive board? Yeah, so you don't want that either. You want someone who says, I will put time, I will do part of what the committee's work is, wherever that may fit. So someone actually wants to labor into it. Okay, for a church, who should be making the final decisions about missions and missionaries? The elders should. Okay, your church leaders should. So that becomes the check on any committee of whoever. So those who are most mature in Christ are the ones who have the final say. But that doesn't mean it's just vetoing. It means they should be guiding and directing for what's going on in the committee. So that gives you some thoughts with that one. Any biblical requirements for the organization of such committee? How it's organized? Biblical requirements.
How it's organized
Uh-huh.
for a missions committee.
Any biblical requirements for missions committee?
It's the only one I could think of. It might be if a woman can't have authority over man, would the chairman be an authoritative?
Depends how you set up the committee. Are they just the person who's doing that? Are they administrative, or are they making decisions? All right, it's a trick question. Is there a mission committee in the scriptures?
No.
No.
No,
no.
so there's no answer.
So it has more to do with church structure.
Yeah.
So what is the church structure? Now I'm going to follow the scriptural principle of church structure, make sure whatever is going on in the committee is still going to be under the rule of the leaders of the church elders. So whatever is going on in the committee, they become an aid to the elders, not the other way around. So that would be the only difficult requirements I can think of. Otherwise, get involved. Let's see if we can get people encouraged in going out. Okay. Any more thoughts on that one? Okay. Now, a lot of these things are still coming from that book from years ago. I still have a copy someplace around here, but we thought through all these kinds of questions, just needing to get started with the policy. Okay, how about, what responsibilities do you think the church would have in, and I have a series of questions, how about raising up missionaries? Whose responsibility is it?
Should be the church.
Should be the church. Where does it usually end up? In pragmatic terms of getting missionaries out in the field.
They come visit you and ask for support.
Well,
Yeah,
like
so it's the church,
church.
it's not the church, it's the missions organization that's trying to recruit people out of your church,
Right.
and how they do it. Two major ways. One is they go to colleges, right? Try and get kids excited about going someplace, and we recruit you to come out. Who's probably really not very qualified to go out as a missionary? College kid. Okay, send them out short term, get their feet wet, but they probably need some training. I think you saw that, David, right? It would help if they had some training before they went out. Some experience in the church. They know if you're gonna go plant a church, shouldn't you be involved in the church? You know what a church is. That would help. The other is typically churches would have a missions conference. So you have a week of meetings, and you're trying to get the church excited about missions, you get someone excited emotionally and get them signed up. Is the person qualified, other than just really being emotional about it?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. So really, where should missions be arising? It should be the church has a mindset toward what are we going to do toward raising up missionaries? What's the first step of raising up any missionary?
Discipleship.
Discipleship. So if where the church is doing its job, it should be training Christians to be mature so that they can go out wherever God calls them. Okay? Should the church be a negative influence on people who would like to go in the field by saying, we can't lose you?
No.
How about parents? But yet that happens a lot. Because a lot of times the church is really hesitant to send someone out if they can see they're very important, very skilled. We want you in the church here so we can build, and we'll send out so-and-so because, you know, they're not really good.
We'll give you the C player. Or team.
So who should be going out cross-culturally? The best.
Yeah.
The best should be going out. So one reason there's problems on the field is because you have a lot of people who are really not ready yet. They haven't the maturity. We had a guy come around here many years ago. He was really interested in going and planting churches. I don't remember what country now. He was young. I said, well, what's your involvement with church currently? What has been your involvement? And it ended up nothing. Got excited about it in college. He had to go out and plant a church cross-culturally somewhere. Has you ever been involved with any church plant in the United States? Ever go out with your church and go do evangelism? And it was just no. And it's like, how in the world do you think you're going to go do this cross-culturally when you've never even done it in a culture you understand? And yet that's often what happens. And you don't want to discourage the enthusiasm, but somewhere you've got to direct this. So that means the church has a responsibility. Someone's enthusiastic about missions, about interning them in all sorts of different aspects of church work so they understand what they're going to face when they get out there. Not that they're going to replicate it exactly the way you have it in your church, but at least they have some understanding. But isn't that also true when it just comes to sending pastors out to go plant a church even within our own culture? You have the same kind of problem. So training is something the church should always be doing with the mindset is, praise God if they go someplace else and continue that work. That's what missions is all about. It's one reason I'm enthusiastic about Lance's effort with the culinary students. And we know they're only here for a couple years. So as far as it building this local church, guess what? That's not going to happen. Financially, they're not contributing a lot. In fact, financially, they cost us. Can you think of a better strategy, though, to reach all around the world than training college students or going to end up going some other place? Infect them with the disease of discipleship. Right? So that's strategic because we have to be thinking, how do we train? And that's what we're always doing as a church. Which reminds us that we're only part of something much, much larger than ourselves. Okay? So that's going to be part of it. So we have a responsibility. How about sending out the missionary? Who should be doing that? The mission organization?
Church should also be church.
It's the church. The church is the one who sends. You go to Acts, who sent them out?
The church.
Antioch. The church at Antioch did. Paul and Barnabas just didn't go, okay, we're going to go out, so we're going to go around to all the local churches, raise money, and so we can go do what we want. The church saw it, and they sent them out. So who took responsibility for them?
Church.
The local church did. So, yeah, there is a theme here, David. Okay, how about supportive missionaries on the field? Who's responsible for all that?
The church.
Okay. If it's someone going out and they're supported by multiple churches, whose ultimate responsibility is it? The sending church. Okay. So that means the sending church should have more responsibilities in helping that missionary even raise that support.
Yes.
Okay, there's some pragmatic aspects of that. If I get a request for someone to be considered as a missionary here, and they don't have a letter from their pastor, I don't even look at it. That's the first thing I look for. If you don't have the support of your pastor, why in the world do you think I'm going to support you?
Mm-hmm.
So there should be a tie. When we were the sending church with Plotniks, I wrote the letter that was sent along with his letter, but I wrote the cover letter of who he was and why we were behind him and sending him out. I was the interface between the missions organization and him. I asked all those questions. That's responsibility of the sending church. So even if it's multiple churches involved, because that's taking our responsibility seriously, following the pattern that we saw in Acts. Does that mean that it has to work that way? Not necessarily, because here's a pragmatic one. One of our missionaries was sent out from his church. It's now 30 years since he was sent out. No one at his home church even knows who he is. Now that's very sad because it's not his fault that he has gone back, but there's turnover in the church, and they didn't do their part of keeping up with him. He's very good at sending letters. We get emails at least every other week. We get letters at least once a month, so he's been very good at that, but nobody at his home church even knew who he was anymore. That's pretty sad. So it could be other churches take on the responsibility. Okay? That includes holding the missionary accountable. Is support of a missionary on the field, is financial support enough? Why or why not?
Just financial?
Is that enough? Most missions programs in most churches, as I said before, it's the treasurer who knows the missionary in missions, because it's just about how much money we're sending.
Yeah, so it shouldn't stop with finances, it should stop with, it should be interfacing with people, letters, stuff like that.
There's a responsibility to educate the people about the missionary, making sure we are praying for them, that people are aware of them, but also communication back to the missionary too, what's going on with them.
They may have needs that aren't financial.
And they may have all sorts of things. First time, I've done a couple of policies. First time, as one of my responsibilities as associate pastor, was putting together the missions policy with a committee, and it had an active committee. So as part of that, and I was new to the church, I was trying to get to know the missionaries. One of them I started writing to, and their last name was Never.
Never
And the
forget
joke
that
was
name.
is that they're never because you never hear from them. That was bad. They were sent out from this church. The man got saved in that church, he got discipled in that church, he was sent out by that church, but it had been over 20 years. And his responsibility, they had gone out with new tribes, but they wanted to work more with the tribe, not just do the translation, so new tribes dropped them. And they never really did hook up with another missions organization. And even though it was only about a 4-hour drive from where they were, from where we were, or 5 hours, I guess, no one had been out there in years. So I started corresponding with him and found out that he had translated the Bible into the Kokopah Indian language of, I don't know why he picked these one. It was Mark, Ruth, and bits and pieces of others. But the first was like, well, has this been printed yet? No. Well, there was a fellow in our church who actually was on the board for United Indian Mission, and they print Bibles in Indian languages. So they're used to the funny letters and stuff. So I said, well, can we help you? So we got involved with them, and ended up, he sent a photocopy of the handwritten transcript he'd been working on, and we computerized it for him. So we had people come in. We got really excited about this. We're going to do it. We got Mark now done, and now we sent it back to him for him to check it, and then we were going to have this other mission print it. So we sent it to him, and
Never heard from him?
crickets, crickets, and we're like, well, what's going on with it? And the end of this tale, it's just very, very sad. It had been so many years since they'd done anything. The major person they had who would do that kind of checking had died some years before, and he was having trouble getting somebody else to do it. But it also turns out that since he couldn't make it financially, he had started driving school bus many years before. And then he had bought a home, he'd raised his children there, and he was doing this typical thing most people do. His life was now wrapped up with stuff. And so he really wasn't really doing much anymore with his supposed mission. So
So he like moved someplace.
So we finally just said, you need to do something, or there's no reason for us to support you. You're not doing anything. And so we eventually just dropped the support. But it was very sad that all this work went in. Here's a man who was very excited when he went out. What happened over the years? And whose fault was it?
No accountability.
The sending church was actually the one who was responsible. And I want to, and that's why I tell the story. The actual responsibility wasn't on Mr. Nevins. It was very obvious as time went on what was going on with him. There was nobody he was isolated, he wasn't part of a group, it wasn't a team effort, and he just became more and more and more discouraged, more and more just caught up with the stuff of life. And what had been something very exciting, I'm sure, when he got in there, because he had done a lot of work, never got printed. And so that tribe could have had at least the Gospel of Mark, and I think it was Ruth, and gotten somebody excited. But really it's the sending church that was the problem. Where was the support? Especially when, this is California and they were over in Yuma. It's like 5 hours. Like, go out there.
Yeah.
So I just have to put that emphasis. This is something that we see that's important. God has commissioned the church, not parachurch organizations. Para means alongside. It should come alongside the church to help the church fulfill its responsibilities, not the other way around. And I'll expand on that in a little bit. Okay, so financial support. What other type of support should be given missionaries to the field? Well, definitely encouragement. Probably some pragmatic things. The DR thing is physically going and taking part in their mission thing, right? The Brennans are always inviting people to come down and actually physically come and take part in the ministry they have there. Because then you get pretty excited about doing it. I know that's another place you guys want to go at some point and see what God's been doing down in Brazil, but also to encourage them and actually help them out with something they're doing down there. There's a lot of ways to support them. We don't want to be the kind of groups that the treasurer sends a check. That's not good. Okay? Okay, what response does the church have in developing new mission fields? Yeah, it actually belongs to the church, doesn't it?
If we send them, we sending them to a place.
And shouldn't we be mindful of trying to think about, well, how can we reach a different group? And it could be something, here's an interesting thing about, after World War II, you had GIs go all over the world, and missions exploded in the late 40s and early 50s in the United States, of people going out, because they had been someplace, they got a burden for doing something. And so they came back, they told their churches, they were excited about this, we need to reach these people. And the churches rose up, there was new organizations put together to try to help and assist, but it's all because people got a burden. So the church took on the responsibility, and you can trace that in missions history. It was an individuals get excited about something that spread that excitement, let's start strategizing. And we're glad that a lot of it has done a lot better than what David Carey experienced when he first went out.
William Carey.
William Carey. I'm looking at you as my missionary. Should,
Thank you, bags.
probably should.
Whoa.
William Carey. So he goes out with, he didn't have any of that. He was kind of isolated, but the church should be encouraging. All right. How about care of missionaries home from the field?
Just one.
Okay, missionaries home on furlough, missionaries retire. Who's responsible there?
Sure.
It still should be the church. It's very common for missionaries who are home from the field, and churches don't want to support them because they don't think they're doing the missions work because they're not out in the field. Or if they come home, they retire, we're dropping your support. It's sort of like, you come home from the field, you don't need to eat anymore.
Makes sense to me. There's grasshoppers out there.
There's-
Yeah.
So, you have to think through those things too. What will be your policy? Okay, let's talk about pros and cons of missions agency, which really is any parachurch organization. What would the pros of a missions agency? How can they help you?
Structure. You get back to structure then.
Okay.
They have gifts and skills your church may not have.
Hopefully.
Hopefully, I'm assuming.
Well, hopefully they have that. Hopefully they have expertise you don't have. Okay? Hopefully they're structured so that they're pulling together people with a common burden for an area or a group of people so they can work together and be more effective, because now you do have a team even though they're coming from different local churches. Hopefully they have an expertise in helping you learn the languages, learn the culture. They should know something about what it actually costs to be out there and help you with all that. There's a lot of logistics that a parachurch organization who has become well organized and knows the field they're working in can be a real help to the church in sending out a missionary. That's the way it's supposed to work, and that means that's a true parachurch. They come alongside the church to help the church fulfill its responsibility. Not all mission organizations have that mindset. One that does is Biblical Ministries Worldwide. That's definitely their mindset. They see themselves as, we're here to assist you in getting a missionary out in the field. Here's what we can do for you. Others aren't quite that way, and this would be some of the cons. What would be a con about a missions agency?
They're taking the burden of raising up missionaries, sending out missionaries, supporting the missionaries on the field rather than the church doing that.
So they've taken away the responsibility of the church, placed it upon themselves. Some actually start feeling they're superior to the church. See, we're the ones really doing it. You guys aren't doing anything. And they start looking at the church as simply as the means of financing. And that happens. We had an organization, we will never work with them again. We knew about it because the brother happened to be in the church, and the problems that this missionary couple ended up having out on the field. If we had not known about it, the brother, we would never known what was going on with him. Even when this guy ended up being, it was a bad problem. He ended up being disciplined and removed from the mission. The mission didn't tell us that, the brother did. And we saw the necessity, long story short, it ended up in divorce between him and his wife because he was having an affair with the woman his wife was discipling. Yeah, it got pretty nasty. They came back. Again, we only knew because the brother, the mission organization, didn't let us know. They went through counseling, and this guy decided he didn't want to be married, and they had 4 kids. So we took on in supporting the wife and the children until they could get settled in someplace. It was several years before she got involved, was able to get in Florida and got involved with the church down there, on staff with their church to help them. And not until then, we continued to support them. This mission organization saw us only as the means to an end. We provided financing so that they could brag about how many new missionaries are being sent out per year, what new fields are being opened. They weren't going to let us know. Another missionary couple, different organization, she had a nervous breakdown, but I didn't find that out until 2 years after she had it. And the reason I found it out is because when they came here, we took a very personal interest, first time I met them, and a real interest, and started corresponding. And then the year furlough was up, and okay, well, why aren't they going back? Because we're corresponding, they finally let me know what was going on. They wouldn't let people know how much stress she had been under because they were very afraid, and the mission organization told them, you let people know, they're going to drop your support. So you can see what ends up happening is the missions organization exploits the church. We get the money there. The church is just as happy to play the role, is because now we exploit the missions organization because they're taking our responsibility and they're fulfilling it for us. And guess who's caught in the middle? We're a missionary. So it's very important for a church to take on its responsibilities and make sure the organization, whoever they're going out with, is actually going to do what they're supposed to be doing. And actually helping, supporting, providing the logistics, and keeping the church informed, not for the money's sake, but so they actually are praying for the person. I can't imagine what it would have been like. They were in Central African Republic while it was going through its civil war. I can't imagine what it would have been like there, emotionally distressed and everything else, and not even be able to tell your supporting churches what you're going through. That's terrible. But you can see how this plays out. So in missions, you want to make sure we are here to do what God has told us to do. And that means, okay, you committed yourself to this person, they're sent out. You're committed to them. Support them. That's more than finances. When they come home, provide a place for them. Welcome them back into your church family and be the resource that's going to help them recover. Right? Furlough should not be a strain, yet for most of them it is. Right? Okay. Any other comments about any of that?
So it sounds like they're more negative than positive.
They can be if it's an organization that is about themselves. But it can be extremely positive if it's an organization that understands their responsibilities and sees themselves as supporting the church according to what the priority scripture has said. So again, Biblical Ministries Worldwide would be one of those. They're extremely good at making sure the churches know they won't recruit a missionary in a church unless the church agrees beforehand. They're going to make sure they want the churches to be providing names for them, not them recruiting out of the church. They want the church to be involved in the training process.
So it sounds like they have to be vetted, these agencies.
They have to be
And
vetted.
just like you have to check up on the missionaries, you gotta probably periodically check up on the agencies, because who knows if they go off the rails at any point.
And often you don't unless
Yeah.
you are actually doing it. So in our policy, we actually put in sections on that. Let's see, it's Responsibilities
D2?
Committee. Yeah, in section D, missionary and missionary agency evaluations. D2, criteria for missions agencies. So you want to know what is their philosophy, what's their doctrine. Not all agencies keep the same doctrine. A lot of times you find out their doctrine is very different than yours. Why are you supporting
Yeah,
it?
they're drifting.
And that could be extremely serious. It's like, where are they even really a Christian organization?
Yeah.
And what they're doing, think world vision. What in the world are they doing? Or it could be, did you just find that Well, here's one we ran. We had a guy who was out with Baptist Mid-Missions. All right, that's okay. It's a fine organization. But we didn't realize how Baptist this guy was until they were just about, he was planning a church in France. They were just about ready to incorporate the church and make it autonomous in France. And then he and the leaders of the church got in a big squabble over this church structure. He was demanding that the church have a Baptist structure of one pastor and deacons and trustees.
Trustees in a foreign country? No state mandate.
So, as opposed to, you know, our church had already changed. It was like, no, we had elders and deacons. It's like, so we're supporting a guy who would not be comfortable being here in our own church. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense, does it? So, you can get, but you have to be on top of that stuff. There's another organization that changed their rule, but we had a guy who wanted to go out with them, and they wouldn't accept him, even an application from him, because we didn't have Baptist in the name. They actually had some very ungracious things to say about churches that don't have Baptist in their name. So I was not ungracious back, but I was pointed.
I wonder if the Antioch Church was called Baptist.
Yeah.
It wasn't?
Does not show that.
Antioch Baptist Church.
So I can make all the jokes I want about Baptists. I have a long history. Not only was raised in Baptist church, but I have an ancestor who followed Roger Williams down to Rhode Island, so he was one of the first Baptists in what became the United States, so I can make my comments. So we require different things of missions agencies and what we require the agency in working with us. I was very pleased with Grace Missions International, GMI, because we were the odd group because we were the sending church, and Grace, GMI, usually it's people from just that church they send up, but we were the sending church. They worked very well with me to keep me informed of everything that's going on. And that's what you want, so that you're not, I don't want to be crass, but prostituting each other, because that's kind of what ends up happening. You're not here to exploit, especially, be there to support the actual missionary as they're going out. And what they're going to do, make sure they can supply everything. When Steve Plodnick went out, we actually tapped into other missions organizations with, like, we had no idea. It was a new field for GMI. We had no idea, well, what should his support be? So we tapped into another organization that understood the expenses of being there, and they helped us set that. So that's where an agency can help. So a good agency, Natasha, is a real blessing. A bad one, you don't even know what's going on. So it can be both ways. Okay, how about criteria for determining who should be sent out and be supported as missionaries? What kind of character should they have?
Spiritually mature, so should be meeting the same criteria as at least a deacon.
I would agree with that, because I think that goes back to basic philosophy. Who did the church at Antioch send out?
Those that were mature.
More than that.
Yeah.
Go back to Acts 8. Who trained the church in Antioch? Saul and Barnabas.
Yeah.
They actually were sending out their leaders,
Yeah.
the ones who came in and trained them and helped that church get established. That's who they sent out. So I think that sets a precedent that you want people well qualified. So yeah, character qualifications, minimum, and that would include someone who's going in a support role should have the character of a deacon, deaconess. So it doesn't necessarily have to be an elder. They may not be in a teaching role, but they should at least have good character. And I guess if all the missionaries you work with in Africa had the character of a deacon or deaconess, you think it would have been a different experience?
Probably.
Only probably? You're being very gracious.
Well, they weren't so bad.
No, some would be very good, godly people, because you talked about them, and others, they could have used a little more time at their home church, right? Before they went out. And that anybody we support and send out, really, we would hope it's going to be a blessing wherever they go, right? So that would be a character quality. So what does 1 Timothy 3 say about qualifications? That should be there. What about the particular spiritual gifts?
Depends on what they're going to go do.
Yeah.
So what exactly it is that they want to go do as a missionary? If someone wants to, I'll go back to this guy who wanted to go plant churches. What do you think the minimum gifts for this guy would be?
Evangelism, teaching.
Teaching, evangelism.
And it should be manifest in some way that people actually know he has those gifts, right? If they're going to go in a support role, what gifts should they have?
Helps.
It really would be good if they had helps, right? That they enjoyed being behind the scenes and not up front. They're going to be a support role and help, right? So other gifts as they come. So you want to try and match someone whose gifts are to match what they say they're going to go out there for. Okay, how about educational achievements?
I think it's the same thing. Depends on what they're going out to do.
If they're going out in a support role, you hope they have at least the, by education, I don't mean a degree, it could be certification, or they had, plenty of experience in that, but they should know what they're doing, right? Do you think there should be some minimal education requirements for all missionaries going out?
I think it's just gonna depend on what they're gonna do. If you're gonna work in a hospital, a missionary hospital, you may need some kind of medical background.
But I think all missionaries should have a certain amount of biblical knowledge.
Yeah, they should be able to share the gospel.
That's what I was
Yeah.
fishing for.
But you don't need a degree for that.
Don't have to have a degree. So maybe I could have, but I just, education requirements, they've completed your discipleship program.
Oh,
Something,
okay.
okay, that just demonstrates they do actually know something about what they're talking about. They know the Bible fairly well. Okay, that's gonna be part of it.
That's kind of like those two together, right?
Well, deacons and elders both would
Experience
have
and
to be
educational
Yeah, that's why one flowed from
They have
the
to
other
be
one. So
able-
what's experience?
Deacons and elders would both have that qualification.
Should. Okay,
They've done
so
what
experience is another part of it.
They've done what they're going out to do.
Do they have the experience to be able to accomplish what they want to do? And again, I think you're still going to come back to a basic premise. You want people going out who are capable of doing it already, not necessarily they're going to learn on the field. There's a lot there. There's so much they're going to be learning on the field anyways.
Yeah.
So already having some capabilities in the area they want to go work with. All right.
I think that's a good thing, or an important thing to think about too. Is we have a lot of people, like you were saying, that are in college and stuff and getting kind of hyped up about it, and then they go out. But you even see Paul, he is kind of in the out training for
He's
what is it,
got them
10
with
years, and then he goes into the mission field, quote unquote mission field.
so. Actually, that's a good example to bring up. So Paul grabs Timothy. He's probably in his teens. He's mentoring him all the way along. But as Timothy is gaining experience and abilities, he gives him more and more assignments. So he was doing exactly what we should think discipleship is about. So that's not excluding someone from going out, but it means if they're going to go out, they're going to go out according to their abilities and serve according to those abilities. So they're going out as an intern, then go out as an intern. That's what David did. He went to Africa. It was, the second time was as an intern. So you were there to assist them, and you learned a lot about things you didn't even want to learn about, like changing things on trucks and crawling under there and getting oil all over you. And part of the work, right? So that's been part of it. How about advantages or disadvantages of each type of missionary? Career, short-term, missionary project work. Career missionary. This is where my life is going to be spent. The advantage?
Long-term investment in the field that they're going to be in.
Yeah. They'll be there long enough to actually really make changes in people's lives.
Yeah.
Okay.
Invested.
Disadvantage?
they could get caught up with life in that
Like
new
that
place.
guy you said.
Could.
Like that, yeah.
How about expense?
So under expense.
Yeah, it gets expensive. So there are pros and cons for it, but long-term for the church is the longer someone's there, the more impact they can actually have on that group. Just like any place you go, the longer you're there, the more impact you have on people. If you're only there for a short time, it could be a flash. So, short-term missionary.
The opposite.
Okay, we mean someone 2 years or less on the field.
Less impact.
Okay, what's the advantage?
Less expense.
It's less expense. Okay, what other advantage there might be? They're not just expense.
Tend to get burned out, probably. They wouldn't tend to get burned out.
They're definitely not gonna get burned out. It might give them enough time out on the field to decide whether this
Decide
is
if
really
they
where they
really-
want to stay.
Good point, yeah.
Because one of the problems with career missionaries and a disadvantage is they make a commitment, they go out and they feel stuck there. Because they've made this commitment to be there and they turned out this is not really where they should be.
They're talking about it for years, they do it.
And then they get out there
find
like, oh,
I'm not meant for this.
this isn't what I thought it was. So short term gives them time to be experienced and also has them out there long enough
To feel it.
to really figure it out. Okay, missionary project worker is there for a short time. Would you call them, David, missionary project workers? You used to have a term for the people who would come out for a couple weeks.
Christian tourists.
Christian tourists. You're there, okay, it's exciting, but the missions organization itself has to do a lot of stuff trying to prepare for these people to come out and get this experience. Okay, so as far as their impact on the mission's purpose there may be very minimal, right? That's what you saw.
Or detrimental.
It could
A
even
lot
be
of times there's
detrimental.
more of an impact on the person going than on
Okay,
the
so
community
there's
going,
the
so-
advantage, right? So if you can get someone out and they go out and they go as a Christian tourist, and they actually see what missions is like and they get to see what's going on, most of the time they come back and they're much more excited about missions itself and want to be involved. So there's a pro and a con there, and you have to weigh that out of the cost benefit. Is it worth it? So some organizations see that, and so they actually develop something for these missionary Christian tourists to gain the experience, knowing that that long-term could be where they get the short-term and the career missionary, and so they'll design it that way. New Tribes has a program where you go out. I'm assuming they're not called New Tribes anymore. They changed their name here recently.
Now it's called
Ethno.
crew.
It's not crew.
These old tribes.
No, I think it's Ethno 360 or something
Oh,
like
yeah.
that. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was New Tribes. They actually had a program in Papua New Guinea. They went out and it was a little longer, but they would spend time with different missionaries who were doing different parts of their total work. So they get a full experience about what missions life is. And it was very successful, but they actually designed it for that purpose. Can we encourage people to think about this as maybe a career? So those are all pros and cons, and so you want to work with anybody going out toward those ends. What you probably don't want to end up with is those who are the Christian tourists. We had a gal go out. It was a new project. This would have been in 1987. They were going to go, China was opening up more than just going in as teaching English as a second language, which is initially how you got missionaries in there. And they were going to do this bike tour. And it was presented as this company in China was making these bikes. They're going to donate the bikes. They're going to bike all these different places in China, and they're going to be able to evangelize while they're biking. There was no evangelism. That was shut down. So it was a very expensive bike tour of China, sponsored by the churches. Wasn't good. So you have to be careful. And the church has a responsibility to checking out those programs, not just let the teen go, hey, this is a great, cool thing I heard about at school. I want to do that, so let's raise $4,000 or $5,000 so I can go. You want to be careful with that. All right, how about guidelines to help a church figure out support levels for a missionary? How is that going to be determined? So first, how should the missions budget relate to the rest of the church budget? Let's start from the church aspect. Should they be separate entities? You can designate to one or the other within the local church. That's very common. You can see on their giving envelope, general budget, missions, building fund.
Well, if you're if we're under the idea that like we should be or the church should be the sending organization, it shouldn't be part of the general budget.
Yeah.
I would think.
What do you
But,
think?
well, if someone has, you talk about if someone has a designated
Designated.
gift?
No, I'm talking about
Oh, a church sets it up that way?
church
Church
sets
sets it
their
up that way.
budget. We haven't had that in
Oh,
a
yeah.
long time.
Yeah,
But that you have a lot of churches, and
Yeah.
if you grab the envelope, that might be even in the pew if they,
yep,
I guess it's online, you can check the box, but it'll have general fund,
Okay.
most common, general fund, missions fund, capital fund, or building fund.
or special, yeah.
So I think, as Jeff said, is if you're now looking to church, who's actually sending them? How are we doing this? If the missions program is under the leadership of the church, then it should be the leadership of the church trying to set the priorities for the church and how we're addressing all things, including missions. Who knows? It might make some of the leaders who
That's a Baptist.
might not,
thing.
exactly. So it might make us a little more attentive as leaders of what's going on in missions. And remembering that the church fits in with a larger purpose that is global. So how we fit in with that. So as we wrote our policy, we specifically changed that. And we changed that in 1998. Here at the church it's a unified budget rather than if people did not like what I was saying, that the missions budget rose rapidly and general budget declined. That was their way of showing their disfavor. So, but more important for us is if missions is part of the whole church, then it's part of the whole church. It's not some separate entity floating out on its own. We want the whole church involved with it and understanding that it's part of the whole church, which means also you're going to have to be mindful of how you're making sure the congregation's involved with it, knows what's going on. That's one reason I have David doing missions moments most Sundays. What's going on with our missionaries? Let's make sure we're aware. How about factors determining the level of support for the missionary? Okay. There's a lot of factors with that one.
I guess the cost of living of wherever they're.
Cost of living, someone's got to be able to figure that out. What does it actually take to live out there? Wherever it is.
Depends on if the church is the sending church or if we're like helping.
Well, if you're helping and someone's coming by, you still want to know how much you're going to try and help them.
Well, right, I was more thinking like if we were the sending church, we probably would want to take more of the financial burden than somebody who's just coming to say, hey, can you help me, kind of thing.
So the amount a missionary is going to get in support is going to be related to,
Their involvement with grace.
well, we actually have that in there, but I was thinking like when you went out single. So the amount that you had to raise was not nearly as much as someone got with a family of 5.
Right.
Okay, your expenses are a lot less. The needs are a lot less. So it's going to be related to exactly what your needs are going to be of your family. Your needs were different in South Africa as opposed to Burundi, weren't they? Okay, South Africa's more expensive, except for travel.
I was with a different agency, so it was a lot cheaper.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Okay. The agency said it differently.
Yeah.
You should really live on, were they the ones advocating that we send you our used tea bags so that you can get better use out of them?
Pretty much.
Pretty much,
With those
okay.
peanuts.
I don't know, you heard about that old joke?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You got your tea bag, you got to string up. and you get your tea, and after it's been dipped 15 times, that's the one that goes to missionary. So. You like that one? Same ideas, yeah. These clothes are good enough for the missionary. Send them off there. There's a lot of factors. You're gonna be looking at debt loads. A lot of agencies have specific things that deal with that. Hard thing with medical missionaries is most agencies don't want anybody going out with a debt. And they have a huge school debt. So now they're busy trying to work that off. They're here for many years, and then they finally get out of debt, and now they're very established here, and they don't want to go. So it becomes a conundrum. So the field medical issues can be a big one. A lot of missionaries come back because just of the medical issues that come up there. That's one. Another factor is going to be is for the church itself. Do you support the missionary fully or partially? Grace Community can send out people fully. They have a lot of money. They fully support the missionary. Just the one church.
Well,
Could we do that?
we could if we wanted to, but I think.
Okay, how much could we pay them? Take the total amount we're sending out for all missionaries. Could that support a missionary?
Depends on where you're going.
That's true. But, yeah, I guess.
Okay,
In a hut.
we can only
Or
support
on
someone.
Antarctica, that one continent that doesn't have anybody yet.
If they're preaching to the penguins, it's gonna be just fine.
Oh, yeah.
So this is a practical thing. So what we did in our policy was trying to factor in the size of church we are.
Yeah.
We also did not want to end up having a long list of missionaries supported at $25 a month, which is actually what we had.
Yeah.
We had
So
a
you're
long
trying to
list,
strike
it was
a balance.
$25 a month
Yeah.
they're being supported.
Would it be significant enough to have an investment in the missionary, and have a
exactly.
connection with them?
So that's what we were looking at, is we want to have enough connection that it's worthwhile for them to come. So we were trying to think, I asked a lot of missionaries, if you're out there and you're trying to raise support, how many churches is it reasonable to have support coming from? We had one guy, he came, he visited, and we were going to have him Sunday, and I said, okay, I want you here that afternoon because we're going to have a potluck, and we're going to, people get to know it. Well, I can't stay, I got to be down to Long Island. I have to leave immediately after church. I said, well, then you have to pick a different Sunday. So, well, how many churches are supporting you? And he had 76 different churches.
Wow.
Okay, he's here for, his furlough's a
With
year.
furloughs,
How do
2
you even,
weeks.
how do you get to them all?
I'm leaving right after church.
You don't, you pick and choose.
You have to pick and choose. 76. He said it's impossible. How do you do it? So that was part of our thought processes of, can we reduce the number of churches to something reasonable so the missionary can actually spend some time at the church?
So what's the average now, do you think?
Our official policy is a minimum of 5%
No, I know
of their
that,
total needs.
but what is the average of the missionaries? What's their average support? How many?
I have no idea.
Oh, okay.
That's going to vary a
It's a
lot by
huge range.
agencies. How many churches do you have? Or churches and individuals?
I had mostly individuals, but it was, I mean, if you went churches and individuals, probably like 75.
Okay.
So, yeah, there you go.
But churches was like 3.
So you can see, okay, but the individuals are also people you need to go be personally, so that still adds up.
Yeah.
And so home field ministries is trying to stabilize, make sure the money's still gonna come in, and that's a terrible way to look at coming home. You know, you hopefully need to get a break, maybe do some extra study and be preparing yourself to be better when you get out there, and it's all, I'm just trying to secure my financial end of it. So as a church, we want to alleviate some of that, and if possible, even it's like, well, how about you stay with us at least a couple weeks or so, and we'll provide for everything, and you can be involved with the ministry here. Because as much as it's hard for us to know the missionary a lot of times, how much worse is it for them to know the churches that are supporting them?
Yeah.
Because most missionaries would like to pray for the churches that are part of it, but they don't know anything. So we set it as a minimum of 5% of their total needs, and then depending on the relationship, up to, I forgot what it was.
25%.
It's 25? 25%. Because we also started thinking through another con, which we've also seen happen. Now I know a lot of this is pragmatic in discussion tonight, But that's part of the stuff you have to be able to answer too. People are going to ask you questions. Why can't we do this, and you got to be able to give a reasonable answer. If a missionary is supported by just one church, or even just or two churches, and one of those churches goes through some hard times and collapses, what about the missionary in the field now?
They drag him down, or her
Yeah.
to missionary.
They're coming back because there's no
Yeah.
means to support them. So you want to have enough that they're being involved at the same time that are not so dependent upon you if you're a small church that, hey, well, what was that latest movie Sherwood Films put out? The major employer went out, so the school collapses, the churches are collapsing because everybody's moving away. Well, what about the missionaries on the field who were dependent upon that? It affects them too. And that happens. When IBM started laying off here in Christmas 91, 92, and 93. In Christmas 91, or 92, we'd had some major people in the church moved away, and then the economy was collapsing. We had, our budget went down fully 1/3. And there wasn't a whole lot there to begin with, so what do? So we had to think through policies too. Who gets cut first? Agencies, they have more resources. And we actually did have to cut our missionaries back a little bit. And God was very gracious. We were able to have them back restored within a year. But what if we had been in a position where we're supporting and they're completely dependent upon us? They be coming home from the field. So those are pragmatic. You're trying to do that. But there's also another aspect of missions too, and the missionary themselves, what's their commitment in the field. And there's a lot of differences that, and that's part of the individuals. Some have gone out with the ideas, well, that's where I'm going to live, and that's where I'll die. Not because of disease, they're trying to avoid that.
What are you looking at me? Why are you like,
Why is everyone
Because
looking
we
at you?
almost lost you out
not
there.
because of disease.
Because we almost lost you out there because of disease, that's why. We weren't counting on that, you weren't either. But he is a true missionary. He's had dysentery out on the field, so yes, he's the real McCoy. So the mindset of the missionary too. Some are like, I will retire here because I will serve the Lord as long as I have breath. That's great. But not all missionaries can be that way. They have so many family ties here, they want to come back at some point. They want to see their family, and we understand that. And fortunately, we do live in a time when that can happen. Plane fares may not be cheap in some standards, but when you think the cost of a plane fare as opposed to being on a ship for months at a time, and you get there and there is no coming back. So mindset has a lot to do with it. You've got to work with the missionary and know what's going on. Some other areas, okay, I already talked a little bit about local church helping missionary raise and support. If you're the sending church or you've agreed to start supporting them, you should probably be involved in trying to help them raise support. Okay, have your letter of recommendation that goes out with them as they're being introduced to the churches. They should be making some of those introductions. How about provisions for missionary retirement? Do you know a lot of agencies have no provision? If they're U.S., they assume, I guess it'll be whatever it's Social Security. There is no provision. So one reason we currently have quite a few missionaries that we're supporting that are retired, there was no provision. So we still believe it's our responsibility to support them until such time as they are graduated to heaven. Because there wasn't anything there. So again, that goes back to some basic philosophy. If we are sending them out with the idea that they are representing us as a church and that they're part of our church, then we're going to support them because they're part of our church. So that's part of that mindset. That's in our policy. How about beginning a support or an ending a support? When should support begin?
I would
Before we
think
send them.
before they send them.
Before they
Probably before they leave.
Yeah.
Okay, and there's a lot of different philosophies, that depends on the agencies. Some, they start getting support as soon as they get it, because they still need that money even for raising more support, don't they?
Yeah, to get
You have
around.
travel expenses if you're, did you have to do much traveling when you're raising support?
Yeah, the town I stayed pretty local.
Okay, you were blessed. It's not uncommon, sometimes it'd be 15,000 miles or more people will put on a car driving around all the place, so those are expenses, so it varies a lot. Our view is you seek to start supporting them. You're going to work with the agency, but as soon as you can, with whatever you can, so they can start paying off and have the money for even raising support. Otherwise, they have to end up, their whole focus ends up on, I still have to live, so they're busy working, and it's harder and harder for them to do the other work they need to do. How about ending support?
A few months after we
Okay, again, it depends
So
on the
they
missionary
die.
and what their needs are, right? Hey, the missionary got married to a really wealthy guy, even if they don't pay him.
That's why she married me.
I think they're married for
It wasn't for the money.
It's the earning potential.
So it's going to depend on a lot of factors, right? For us, one, we've had missionaries who do have a retirement program that was in, so once they're retired, we discontinued their support. But we checked first, what was their retirement? Could they make it on with their retirement income? If so, then we wanted to move that money to somebody who's currently. If not, we want to keep helping them. Someone comes back from the field and is undergoing medical treatment for stress.
Not a good time to, yeah, not a good time to end support.
No, you're going to continue until they can be, you're going to try and help them get stable, right? If they have to go another line of work, fine, but you're going to try and help them to get stable. Because you still want to view them as they are part of our church family.
Amen.
That's the big difference. If you view them as they have a job to do for us, and as soon as they can't do that job, we cut them off, you just lost, I think, a major aspect of what missions is supposed to be. Paul and Barnabas went out as part of the church of Antioch. And where'd they come back? To Antioch to give a report about exactly what's going on. So that becomes part of it. Okay, outgoing establishment expenses, that isn't all that hard. You need to help, that needs to be worked into the budget. It's expensive to get out there, and most agencies require a fund so that they can get you back if they need to, even quickly. What about support of national or native workers whom the church will not meet personally? What do you think about that one? That's a lot of debate in mission circles, has been for about 20, 30 years now.
Caution.
So,
Yeah, caution.
yeah.
Well, cost effectiveness is one reason why they're doing
No,
it.
he said caution.
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 Caution. I agree.
Well, that's wrong. So this is someone that could have been trained out there. And the church is supporting him already?
Well, the whole idea of nationals is we got to find the nationals out there because they already know the culture, they live a
Right.
lot cheaper, they don't have the expectations, you don't have the travel expenses, so we can have 6, 7 guys for the cost of one. So it's from a pragmatic aspect of we're cost effective, and actually there's a good case for that. But how are you going to make sure that they're actually qualified?
Yeah, that would be the caution part.
That's the
That would
caution
be-
part.
That would be difficult.
Without somebody there already,
Yeah.
that you already vet, their character's already vetted to vouch for.
To know that they can do that.
Yeah.
So it's completely dependent upon that person. So are you really supporting a missionary at that point, or is it a missions agency?
It's an agency.
Yeah, even if it's one person, really it's an agency because they're no longer part of your church, are they? They're not part of your congregation. You're actually helping somebody else to accomplish it. That's an agency's work. So I wanted to make that distinction because it's something that I think is very effective and needs to be done. Mani Subramanian, when he was here a couple weeks ago, that's a lot of what he does. Some of it is they try and raise funds for helping these Indians in going out their own communities. But they're also very careful to make sure that support doesn't go directly to them. Otherwise, this guy can end up dependent upon this church, and it's just a financial aspect. The church thinks they're doing great, but now they become independent, and there's not the supervision. So you have to have, if you're going to be involved with nationals, whoever is organized that, you have to be able to trust them. So now you get back into, is that person a good agent? Is this a missions agency you can trust? Okay, but that does remove your local church one step from the missions itself. Now your involvement is financial, and that gets a little more rough. One thing that, like Compassion International, with you knowing the person the kid you're sponsoring, there's personal involvement there. And that's one reason to do it, so there is something like that, not just send your money and feel good about yourself. That criteria should be used for evaluating continued missionary support. They get on the field, should you necessarily continue to support them?
If they continue to meet your requirements and the rest of the policy,
If they continue to meet it, so how are you going to make sure they're doing it?
by staying in
Keeping up with
contact
them.
with them.
Yeah, you have to. That may include, you send out your doctrinal statement every few years or so and say, do you still agree with it? People do change their doctrine over time. Hopefully for the better, but not always. And so sometimes you find they can't sign your doctrinal statement, so they're going to go. Sometimes you find that they are ending up with moral failure, or they're causing division because they don't have the character. So this is one reason why even field visits are really good. You can actually see them in the field. You can talk with co-workers, find out how they're really doing. That's not necessarily for, we're trying to put you under the microscope to see what you're doing wrong and get rid of you. It's more of what's going on. Is there something else we should be doing to support you and encourage you? If you can go out and you find out, yeah, they're getting really stressed, intervene with the agency and say, you know what, we're going to bring this guy home for 6 months. They need a break, they need a rest, they need to, get some additional training or something. You should be an advocate for your missionary. Okay, so it's not a negative, it should be a positive. Okay, and now designated gifts, since you brought that up earlier, Ed. What's responsibility toward designated gifts legally and morally? Do you know?
I don't know what the legal requirement is. I know, I think morally is to give the gift to the person said, designated it to.
Yes.
I don't know if there's a legal
Legally,
requirement we
They're
have.
not required.
Okay.
Legally, it's a gift to if it's the church, it's the church, and the church then determines.
Right.
That's the legal requirement.
I don't think it
That
can be
changed.
tax deductible
If you go
make it-
directly to them, it's actually not tax
it's
deductible.
not, that's what the catch is.
So that's the legal aspect of it. There could be also the aspect, I know some churches have taken this, if you're designating it, but we've already set aside this for them as, like a churches where we're wholly supporting them, is now you're running the end around the elders and what they determine, so they don't want to do that. So there's pros and cons with that either way. Morally, the obligation is if someone's designating it, you need to either follow through on what they've asked you to do, or return it to them,
Right.
or ask them, may we use this someplace else because we can't use it for how you designate it. So that'd be the moral obligation. And that just goes back to basic Christian character on our part. Okay, so we did cover all the different criteria. By doing this, I hope this will help, by doing it by asking the questions, now you look at the missions policy and you can see why it's written the way it is. Does that mean that our missions policy should be used by all churches? Absolutely not. It's a policy for this church as we thought through the issues, considering who we are as a church, the size of our church, our abilities as a church, a local congregation, and our understanding of what God is calling us to. So that's the whole point of it. But hopefully it's the kinds of questions, things you can get other churches too thinking through. Develop a policy. Develop something to make sure that you're not squabbling your church over missionaries, and so your focus can be actually on the missionary and actually helping them, support them, encourage them in whatever that God's called them to do. Because if you're supporting them financially, You should be supporting the other ways and recognize that they are a part of your congregation, serving you in a distant location, or cross-cultural location, or another aspect of the ministry here locally. That should be our goal as a church. Okay? All right, so no class next week, and then the following week is going to be priorities of pastoral ministry, and then stewardship, and we'll try and break that down an hour each. There are a couple of really good books dealing with pastoral ministry. Jim Whitney sent me the it was a article in the Master Seminary Journal where Dick Nahue introduced the book, Rediscovering Pastoral Ministry. It's actually a little good read. I'm going to post that so you can download that as well. It's not much, but it gives a good overview of why you have to have a good mindset about what your priorities are. Otherwise, somebody's going to sway you off to something else, and you won't be doing what God has called you to do. I did have one sermon on it that hopefully be helpful. Jesus Christ, Disciple Maker, I like that book a lot because it put the Great Commission into what pastoral ministry is about. You are here to disciple people.
I think I read that. That's upstairs in the library?
Yeah, you read
I think I read
many
that.
years ago.
Yeah.
And
I have
deacons
the
read
other
it.
one too.
Stewardship, this will be more focused on church, but personal finances, of course, always figuring that well. If we're not doing well in our personal finances, you're not very capable of being able to help the church run its finances. So you got to have some financial, I think. A lot of the material, remember those tapes I gave from Jim Rickard many years ago, the cassette tapes? Because I think you were a deacon at the time I gave them out. It's a long time ago. I think you're fairly new to it. That stuff is all now online, so go to SS Foundation, stewardshipservicesfoundation.net,
Okay.
and he has a lot of that stuff either in print form or audio form. It's just very helpful. He has stuff for church. He actually has stuff for pastors as well. And then I did a whole sermon series on finances. And then Larry Burkett, Ron Blue, Crown Financial all have good material. So hopefully that'd be helpful to you. All right? Everybody tired?
Yes.
No. All right, those who are not can help clean up.
I gotta get up at 4.
Let's pray and let you go home. I'm suddenly very tired. Father, thank you for your many blessings to us, and thank you that we have the opportunity to be used by you in ministry around the world through different missionaries and missions agencies. We are so grateful for those that share the same kind of heart in wanting to see people reach for Christ. They're serious about it. And Father, in partnering with them, we get to hear about what you're doing in other lands, pray for them and supporting them, and therefore take part in that ministry. Father, we know it always takes a lot of wisdom, and only you can give it as we seek to be wise stewards of what you've entrusted to us. Not just the finances, but the people themselves, and where they would go in ministry. In Jesus' name, amen.